are joined with the executive director at the Backus Museum, Mr. Marshall Adams.
Hi, how you doing?
We're
Good.
doing fine. So we just had a couple of questions for you, and I'll go ahead and ask you the first one. Who is Beanie Backus?
Sure. So A.E. Backus was an American artist who was born in 1906 and died in 1990 from Fort Pierce, Florida, which is on the Atlantic coast of the peninsula. His initials, A.E., stood for Albert Ernest, but nobody called him Albert and nobody called him Ernest. They called him by that nickname that he had ever since he was a baby, Bean or Beanie Backus. He was renowned during his lifetime for capturing the idyllic beauty of the Florida landscape as a largely self-taught artist.
Awesome. So, can you tell us a little bit about his impact on Florida artists?
Sure. Bean Backus had a great impact on Florida artists and continues to have that impact today. During his lifetime, he was known and referred to as the Dean of Florida landscape painting, an esteemed imaginary position that everyone kind of thought was great that he'd risen to that level. He was also sometimes described as Florida's painter laureate, also kind of an honorary title that shows how people thought of him during his lifetime. After his death, he was inducted into the Florida Artists Hall of Fame in Tallahassee. And in the Artists Hall of Fame, he is directly responsible for more artists being in the Hall of Fame than any other artist. He was directly responsible for 28 other artists being inducted into the State Artist Hall of Fame. So that impact has resounded certainly throughout his life and even continues to this day.
That's really good to hear. And what would you say was the impact he had on creating the new generation of highwaymen, whose paintings are so popular now?
That's right. So, one of the things that we all remember about the Backus story is that he was raised to be, as a person and as an artist, he was raised to be progressive and inclusive at a time when that seemed especially rare. And so when he practiced the idea of his door being open to anybody who was interested in art or in good conversation or who needed a helping hand, to him, that meant anybody, whether you were a woman, whether you were a man, whether you were Black, whether you were white, if you were religious or non-religious, if you were rich or you were poor, it didn't matter to him. He thought what was important was the person. And that does seem rare to some even today. So among the people who were welcome in his studio were a number of enterprising artists, beginning in the 1950s and the 1960s, who were looking for a way to become artists themselves, to be successful artists. And they were African Americans at a time in the Jim Crow South, as it's described during racially segregated times, where it was more challenging for African Americans to pursue an artistic career. They were shut out of white-owned galleries, and they couldn't open their own galleries because they wouldn't be able to attract white clients. So Backus encouraged them to become artists. He gave them art supplies, he gave them tips, he coached them on sales techniques, and was always available for a critique or to kind of help them out. And they came up with this amazing idea, where their name comes from, the Highwaymen, is that because they couldn't open a gallery, like Backus had his own studio that customers, clients could come into, the Highwaymen artists realized that if the people couldn't come to them, they should take their art to the people. And the best way that they came up to do that was to take the paintings that they created, put them in the trunk of a car, and drive it around to find those customers, those clients. So that was quite an enterprising idea, that kind of direct sales idea for these young artists. And Backus was very encouraging of them during his lifetime. In fact, he probably gave some of those artists their very first kind of gallery exhibition here in the original, what used to be the Fort Pierce Art Gallery, which is now named after Backus at the Backus Museum.
Gotcha. That's really nice to hear. And I just have one last question: is that you've noticed that Backus's art style changed a lot from the start of his career to the end of his career. How would you describe the progression of his art through his age?
Oh, great question. Well, certainly an artist's, you certainly hope that an artist's work progresses, evolves, maybe changes throughout their lives. Backus was an artist and was painting for a very long time. He was painting as a teenager beginning and then continued up until his dying day in 1990. And there is a progression that you can see in his work. When he began as a young artist, he was painting um, very fast with thick paint, thick oil paint on canvas, usually canvas. And he was a young man on a mission, so he was painting fast and but painting well and painting with extraordinary skill for a self-taught artist. But as he got more secure in his career and people began buying his paintings and he began getting a list of clients, that gave him some security to realize, well, I could slow down a little bit and I could be a little more careful, I suppose. And so into his more mature years as an artist, you can see that the paintings get a little more detail oriented. And they are a little, the paint is not as thick all the time. It's a little more careful, a little more nuanced in his approach to his landscape subjects. So people remark about that often. Sometimes when you look back at other famous artists back in history, the progression goes backwards. They start off very detail oriented and careful, and then in their older age, they kind of loosen up and relax. And so it's funny that Backus did the opposite of that, did an inverse path of starting off that way and then honing his talents and his skills so that he could get to that level of mastery that he observed even unto his dying day.
That's so interesting, that inverted path that he had. I want to thank you once again, Mr. Marshall Adams, Executive Director at the Backus Museum. And thanks for talking to us today.
It's my pleasure. Thank you.
Thanks.